compartmentalization. Getting into the nuts and bolts of. In our cultural West, as distinct from the cultural East, our thought machines are deeply rooted in various forms of intellectuality. Intellect is defined as the power of knowing, as distinguished from the power to feel and to will. It also refers to the capacity for knowledge. Intelligent is defined as guided or directed by intellect, with special emphasis on rational. Intellectualism is devotion to the exercise of intellect or to intellectual pursuits. Bear in mind that these are not my definitions, but those found in any standard Webster's dictionary. Footnote number 48. Ingo frequently cites definitions in Webster's dictionary, but it is not always clear to which edition he refers. The 1828 edition was a particular favorite, but a reference could denote any edition up to the 9th, published in 1983, 4 years prior to his starting this book. Essentially, what these definitions mean is that with our intellects, we can think about and discuss, for example, dragons or archangels without ever encountering them and experiencing their real reality. Our reality of them, then, becomes what we make it. Likewise, we can discuss dinosaurs or extraterrestrials without ever encountering them and experiencing their real reality. We see pictures of dinosaurs, tiny pictures, in books, and perhaps giggle. For some, the real reality of dinosaurs can be adjusted by going to a museum and standing alongside a reconstructed skeleton of a Brontosaurus or Tyrannosaurus Rex and finding that the tops of our heads come up to just over their ankle bones. We forget that in the not-too-distant past, many so-called informed intellectuals, veil weavers one and all, said that dinosaurs never existed and were imaginative figments of confused people who, nonetheless, went busily about digging up the first gigantic leg bones. People who have seen and experienced a UFO of any kind tend to view their reality differently from those who have not seen or experienced one. Burnt landing rings in grass, seared trees, radar blimps being tracked on dozens of radar screens, abductees, and sometimes hundreds of eyewitnesses, all notwithstanding. Certain intellects opine that all these are imaginative figments of confused people, and that the real reality is electrical balls, inverted weather air bubbles, or weather balloons. However, for the abductees, now several thousands of them, who have been paralyzed, lifted away, and dragged into an examination room, and whose vagina or rectum has been inspected, a different reality exists. We will call this kind of reality experimental reality, to highlight its contrast to mere intellectual reality. When a person experiences something only at the intellectual level, the reality of the experience is established intellectually. This reality will be whatever the programs the intellect is based upon makes of it, which is to say that it can be anything at all and far removed from the actual real reality. Many intellects have no idea of what really happened in many areas, but they make opinions and realities anyway, and with great gusto. The reality levels, and this is decidedly in the plural, of a person's intellect depend upon what information has been fed, programmed into the intellect. When new, incoming information arrives that exceeds the capability of the programs installed in the intellect, a crisis develops. The usual way of handling this crisis is to reduce and redefine the new information so that it fits comfortably with the intellect's already installed programs. When new, incoming information is so powerful and so real that it cannot immediately be reduced and redefined, the reality levels of the intellect become fearful, begin to wobble, and collide. They may even go bonkers. When this imbalance gets out of hand, the only way to protect the stability of the intellectual whole is to totally reject the new information, and this is often done. When a person has achieved a large enough picture of psychic realities, it can be seen that the intellect is almost solely a function of the humanoid psychic system. The psychic system of the genetic body and the super-humanoid psychic system are relatively intellect-free. The intellect is individual and guided almost solely by self-interests, and this "and" is very important, self-imagining. It becomes very important to discover where, when, and why the intellect accepts its informational programming, and this will be discussed in some of its excruciating details throughout the rest of this book. The purpose here has been to establish that there is a considerable difference between mere intellectual reality and experimental reality. Experimental reality is probably the closest link we have to joining our reality thresholds to real realities. Any developed tolerance for experiencing real reality depends upon the individual's abilities to integrate correct and appropriate emotional assessments, intuitive assessments, intellectual assessments, and psychic realization, the whole of which often can deal on a one-to-one basis with what is happening and being observed. Realization means to accomplish, which in turn means to understand fully, to execute fully, and to perform fully. In the absence of this complete integration, there exists only states we can call pseudo, false, partial, incomplete, and so forth. Many intellects can be described as pseudo-intellects or false intellects, etc., all of which are often prone to accomplishing only destructive things when their programs are being exceeded by real realities. How does one judge whether one's own intellect or that of another is false or not? This is one of the first tasks of psychic realization, and it is not up to me to give irrevocable guidelines for this kind of judgment. But anyone you encounter who knows it all, has all the answers, and believes that their beliefs are the correct and only beliefs can certainly be suspected as having a false or pseudo-intellect. People who say there are things we were never meant to know, strange places that ought never be explored, mysteries better left ignored, are people with false intellects, and are veil weavers to boot. The maturing intellect often reveals itself by acknowledging that the more I learn, the less I know. The ability of a person to realize the limits of self-knowledge, to say, there are things I don't know or don't understand, actually opens the doors to future psychic realization and is, of itself, a psychic realization. For when this kind of realization pertains to psychic matters, it is a healthy accomplishment, and with it one can begin to perceive many of the nuts and bolts of the materials of the psychic universes. Unfortunately, many neophytes embarking on the path of psychic realization defeat themselves very early on that path by seeking to acquire only intellectual knowledge or by processing what they learn only through their existing intellectual programs and mental corridors. This kind of neophyte accepts only what makes them feel good and rejects troublesome concepts and realities. Easily, they become targets and voluntary victims of lie weavers and end up becoming psychic and intellectual wrecks, human robots. Any reversal of this stasis requires the loosening of the nuts and bolts that lock the humanoid intellect into its given programs. There are two kinds of psychic initiation. The first unlocks undesirable nuts and bolts. The second exposes one to new, experimental realities. The intellectual programs of our cultural West are severely impaired regarding all psychic matters, which, in turn, has led to significant impairments regarding the potentials of psychic realization. It is helpful, if not mandatory, for the neophyte to have some understanding of how this impairment has come about.